If I want to manage the virtual hard drive for my virtual machine, the virtual machine has to be turned off, so you have to shut down, and you can also not have a checkpoint file. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to delete my checkpoint. Now that that's deleted, I'm going to go to settings for RTS SVR2. When I choose hard drive, the edit button is an option. Now, if you had a checkpoint, you would not be able to click edit, and it would actually give you a message saying that edit is disabled because your virtual machine has a checkpoint. And naturally, you cannot edit the hard drive while the machine's actually powered on and running. That would never work. But now that my machine is shut down, I have no checkpoints, I'm just going to choose edit. If we click next in this initial window here, this will let me do several things. Well, the first I'm going to look at is convert. If I click convert, this is a VHDX file right now. If you wanted to, you could convert this to be a VHD. There is no reason you would ever do that today. In the past, you may have done that. If you were going to take this and run it on a 2008 Hyper-V server, no chance you would do that today. So where this is relevant from today, if you did have an old Hyper-V server like 2008 R2, you would have long upgraded it. But if you did have a virtual hard drive created on an operating system 2008 R2 or older, it's going to be VHD because VHDX requires Server 2012. Well, what you would do, you could simply copy and paste that virtual hard drive to your 2012 up through 2019 Hyper-V server, or you could do an export and import, same as a copy. But once you copied it over, it is a VHD. What you could do is take your VHD and you would have converted it to a VHDX just by clicking edit. And now it gets all the characteristics of being a VHDX. So you can go either direction, although there's no practical reason you'd ever go backwards to VHD. When you create a virtual machine, the hard drive is always a VHDX file. And if I click next, when you create a virtual machine, the hard drive is also always a dynamically expanding hard disk, and you don't have the option to change it when you create the virtual machine. All it gave you the option to do related to the virtual hard drive was you could change the location it was saved, and you could change the size. It would default to 127 gigabytes. You could have set it to a different number, but you could not have said VHD, could not have chose a fixed size. Now, it even tells us here, fixed gives you better performance and recommended for workloads that are sensitive to disk performance. That would be like some type of database application. But the trade-off is it consumes a lot of white space. So if this is a 127 gigabyte hard drive and you made it fixed, it's going to pull all that space, 127 gigabytes, from your physical disk, and it's now consumed by the virtual disk, which you may never actually use with the virtual machine. My dynamically expanding is only as large as what you save into it. So this hard drive, if I go back to my C users, public, documents, and all the way down, RTS Serve 2, that hard drive is only 9.53 gigabytes, and that's with a full operating system installed in it. Only 9.5 gigabytes. It will never exceed 127 gigabytes, but it's only as large as what you saved into it. If I click configure, there's nothing to change here. If I just wanted it moved to another location, you could browse and just have it saved somewhere else. So the primary things there, you can convert fixed to dynamic or dynamic to fixed if you want to change that. And you can go between VHD and VHDX. Well, I'm going to click previous and just go all the way back. So that's the initial screen that came up. So we just looked at convert. Now, you also have the option to compact. A dynamically expanding disk never dynamically compacts itself. So right now I'm using 9.5 gigabytes of space. But let's say I save a bunch of data to this and it balloons up to use 80 gigs of space. Well, then I delete that data and I only have really 10 gigs of data on my drive, we'll say. But because it had once reached 80 gigs in capacity, it never dynamically compacts itself. So if I want to reclaim that space, you would just come here and click compact. There is no configuration or anything. You just click compact, click finish, and it's going to compact that drive. and just get rid of all the white space in it. Microsoft says it would be too resource intensive if this dynamically expanded and dynamically compacted. So you just have to go through manual compaction if or when you want to do that. Now, the other and last option is to expand. To expand, if I click next, this is a 127 gigabyte drive right now. If I want it to be, we'll say 200 gigabytes, I could just type in 200 gigs. And we can go next. And when I finish, it's just going to be a 200 gigabyte drive. Well, we can do that. We'll just finish. Now, if we go back to edit, and if we looked at the expand, you'll see its current size is 200 gigs. Now, because I expanded it, another option appeared. So if we go back a few steps, this shrink, this reduces the capacity. Because I expanded it, it added in this shrink option. So if I shrink, I could now, I'm going to make it 127 gigabytes again. I could now make it smaller. Well, you can next and finish, and it would actually do that. Now, the difference, shrink and compact, sometimes if you see them written out on paper or like on a website, they can be a little confusing. When you compact, all it does is get rid of white space that's not used in your dynamic disk. It does not change the size that you allocated for your disk. When you shrink, you are physically changing the size. So if it's 127 gigs, or in our case, 200 gigs, and you want it to be smaller, you can just shrink it. The only requirement to shrink is you cannot shrink below the space you've actually used. So if this does have 150 gigs of used space, data, 150 gigs in use, then you cannot shrink it to 127 gigs because you have more data than that on the drive. So you can only shrink through free space. Pretty fascinating and very straightforward to actually work with.